Today is March 28th, 2026. I'm Connie Barlow, and I'm going to be reading the major points in the Wikipedia page, Endangered Species Act of 1973. Now, give me my qualifications for being able to talk about what the Endangered Species Act is about. You see these four books right here? The oldest one is in 1991, and then 1994, 1997 moving up, and then 2001. The top one is the one that's really pertaining to botany. The rest of them are about ecology and evolutionary ecology. But the 2001 book is The Ghosts of Evolution, Nonsensical Fruit, Missing Partners, and Other Ecological Anachronisms. Now, I'm also the founder of a citizen naturalist group called Torreya Guardians. Founded that back in 2004, 2005, after my main science mentor, Paul S. Martin, Professor Martin, at the University of Arizona, and I co-authored an essay that's Bring Torreya taxifolia north now. Torreya taxifolia is one of just two endangered trees here in the USA, and it's critically endangered. It was listed as endangered in 1984, got its first recovery plan under the Endangered Species Act in 1986. And our group has been using loopholes in the Endangered Species Act that apply just for plants. You couldn't do what we do for animals, but for plants we legally can. And I'll talk more about that as it goes on. But I just wanted to mention my qualifications here, because as a science writer, reading a lot of scientific papers, and founding and being the major networker and webmaster for a citizen group working under and around the auspices of the Endangered Species Act of 1973, I really am qualified to be able to walk through this Wikipedia page. Now, the main reason that I'm able to is, I'll show you an image of this, but if you look at the page information access on the Endangered Species Act of 1973 Wikipedia page, if you look at the page information and you go down into revision history, users, and so forth, you'll find that of all the characters that are on this page now, that is the words but in a character format on here now, I am 71% of the entire author here. Okay, there are other people who've been authors. I'm one of the more recent ones, but 71% of this is mine, and I have put in thousands of hours since I started doing this edit on this Wikipedia page. I've been a Wikipedian for, gosh, since I think about 2020. So as I'm retired, I'm 74 years old. And so I have a lot of time that I can volunteer for, in addition to my work in Torreya Guardians. And so I decided to take on improving this particular page on the ESA of 1973 back in July of 2023, because I looked at it at the time and it just wasn't up to snuff for all the journalists and other people who might want to look in December 2023 at the 50th anniversary of this act, might want to learn about it. So I started working on it then, could not really complete it by then. I just had so many law review articles, academic papers to read, the kinds of references that work well in Wikipedia. You have to be very careful of using good references. I also like to be able to reference things where I could put in an online link so that even people who don't have access to a lot of these journal articles, they could find a PDF of it. So anyway, I've been working on it off and on since then, and I keep updating it. It's a real advantage I see for Wikipedia. Not only can a number of people keep working on it and discussing it with each other, But anytime something new comes along or we find there's an error in it, I can go back in here and I can improve it. I couldn't do that with my books. Once you submit them, they're done. Same with academic papers. So I really value Wikipedia. So what I'm going to be doing here is going through, showing you a screenshot of what I'm doing, going through the Endangered Species Act of 1973 Wikipedia page. So let's get started. Endangered Species Act of 1973. This is the Wikipedia page. Now, I've already, in the introduction, mentioned the tools feature here. When I click on it, I mentioned page information. In fact, let's go there. Let's take a look. So page information here, there's a lot of stuff you'll see when you go down here. Most important features would be the revision history statistics. This is where I show that I have been contributing right now. I've got 71% of all of the characters. That is the text inside of this document. And actually, as I go through, most of the images I've inputted too. This is a useful one, especially for journalists, politicians, anyone in their page view statistics. So you get here, page view analysis. Let's shift to the biggest feature we can get, and that is the last 90 days. All right, so let's take a look. Here you can see the last 90 days. And what you find interesting here, first of all, something happened on December 29th of 2025, which caused a huge amount of additional views. Mostly it's below 150 ever since 2023 was getting a lot more because of the 50th anniversary. But we're usually below 150, and you can see it going weekdays is when we get the most in here. Now, let's go back. Let's go back to the tools bar here and take a look at download as PDF. I'm not going to click on that, but if you do, you can download it. And the reason I wanted to show you this is because the way I'm going to read only excerpts is I'm not going to figure out as I go along. I've already downloaded a document as PDF form, and you see it's a different pagination here because it has to fit on a page normally for people who want to print it out. But you can see I use highlights to show what parts I'm going to be reading along the way. Okay, let's head back to this page here because I want to show you the contents once again as I did in the introduction. So over here you can always look on the table of contents, and then if you just go like this you click out of it. Table of contents. The top is what you see here. It goes a little farther. But let's take a look at how many subsections we can see in the history section here. So we're first going to be going through these, and I'm mostly going to read all of these because this is just the basic content, not very long. We'll see if I have enough time in this first part of this video series to actually get into features of the 1973 Act as amended. You can see there's a little bit more here that goes on. I may have to put that in a separate video. And for sure, when I get to here, this is the one, when I started working on this in 2023, there was no section called Challenges and Controversies. In fact, it was pretty pathetic. The first, the history part in the top was pretty good, but it was just people coming in here and saying something really positive and something very negative. It was the worst as Wikipedia sometimes gets to. So as a science writer myself and really committed to journalism as well, I take a neutral stance and show both the positive and the negative, but only really significant things. I don't get into personal details and so forth. And always find examples of where it applies to the endangered and threatened plants and animals. And you'll hear me saying plants and animals first. even though plants were not added until the 1973 Act. But it's plants that I deal with. And I can guarantee we're not going to have enough time to get through this entire list here. There are actually 29 subsections to this section. So it may take me 2, maybe even 3 more videos to get through that. So clicking out of that. And I already showed this section. First of all, I'm going to skip this one entirely. This is the section that was there before, in 2023, I began to edit the Wikipedia page. And this one it's really legalese. I have never even read the whole thing. It was very important in the beginning when that was the only neutral section you could really find, beyond the top and a little bit of the history. But really, the Wikipedia is much more for how are people going to use it who aren't lawyers, okay? Just the rest of us, including politicians, even including staff who help politicians. So I'm skipping that section. In the introductory video, I showed the references. And right here, you can see it's a double column in the Wikipedia online format. And look at, I'm going to show you how far this goes. By far, most of these references, and again, I've used a lot of law review articles. Congressional Research Service has tremendously excellent reports, neutral, plus academic, especially review papers in academic journals, and that's where they can't just be putting forth their own spiel, but they're really reviewing an important topic. So look what we have here, 409, Endangered Species Habitat Conservation Planning. This is the last reference added, and you'll see it goes as far as 409. Okay, so let's go back, and from here I'm going to move to the PDF I made of the Wikipedia page, Endangered Species Act of 1973. And so again, I'm just excerpt reading this here for what's important. The purposes of the ESA are twofold: to prevent extinction and to recover species to the point where the law's protections are not needed. For example, Section 4 requires the agencies overseeing the ESA to designate imperiled species as threatened or endangered. Section 9 prohibits unlawful take of such species, which means to harass, harm, hunt. Section 7 directs federal agencies to use their authorities to help conserve a listed species. And whenever you see red, that's just a note to myself. I'm going to click on the reference. Number 2 is here. The reason why I'm showing it like this, because what doesn't show up in the PDF are all the places that you can go upwards to all the places where this appears. And notice it's the Congressional Research Service, the Endangered Species Act Overview and Implementation, and the update was March 2021. So they keep updating these things, but let's just randomly go take a look at where it is at part D here, okay? D. Oh, up here, C2? Okay, so that's how you can keep going back and forth and finding these things. If I go back here, go again, let me go to X, see where that goes to, right here. So this is quite a ways down. Okay, back to where we were. Skip this section, and now I'll move into the history section, and actually quite a bit I did add to, and tried to make it, I've used a lot more section heads to try to make it easier for people to find things. History. Calls for wildlife conservation in the United States increased in the early 1900s because of the visible decline of several species. One example was the near extinction of the bison, which used to number in the tens of millions. Similarly, the extinction of the passenger pigeon, which numbered in the billions, caused concern. And I might mention here that the passenger pigeon actually went extinct back in 1914, And I produced a video myself in September 2014. That was the centennial. It was the anniversary of the extinction of the passenger pigeon. The last one died in a zoo, of course. The whooping crane also received widespread attention as unregulated hunting and habitat loss contributed to a steady decline in its population. By now it has recovered some, but certainly not enough to put it from endangered down to threatened yet. By 1890, it had disappeared from its primary breeding range in the north-central United States. And I think the primary breeding range now is one that they restarted way up in Canada somewhere. And it's a migratory species up in the Arctic and or subarctic, and then back down into the Texas coast for spending the winter. To address these concerns, Congress enacted the Lacey Act of 1900. The Lacey Act was the first federal law that regulated commercial animal markets. It also prohibited the sale of illegally killed animals between states, that is, interstate commerce. And anywhere you see an underline on a Wikipedia page, and also on a Wikipedia page it shows up as blue, when you click on that, that would take you to the interstate commerce Wikipedia page so that you could learn about interstate commerce. Other legislation followed, including the Migratory Bird Conservation Act, and see there, you can click on that. The 1937 treaty prohibiting the hunting of right and gray whales, and the Bald Eagle and Golden Eagle Protection Act of 1940. Now, those two things are very important to remember that happened for the birds, the migratory birds, the big migratory birds, and some of the small ones too, is that in order to recover a species, and you lose the Endangered Species Act to do anything for it, you want to have other things there that will maintain its recovery. And usually that's going to be at a state level to make sure the state has those kinds of things going. But also, here you've got two bird laws that help with things. All right, Endangered Species Preservation Act of 1966. So this is a subsection here, and so this is the first time that they actually use the term endangered species in an act. Despite these treaties and protections, many populations still continue to decline. By 1941, only an estimated 16 whooping cranes remained in the wild. By 1963, the bald eagle, the U.S. national symbol, was in danger of extinction in the lower 48 states. Only around 487 nesting pairs remained outside of Alaska. Loss of habitat, shooting, and DDT poisoning contributed to its decline. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service tried to prevent the extinction of these species, yet it lacked the necessary congressional authority and funding. In response to this need, Congress passed the Endangered Species Preservation Act. Now again, this isn't the one of 73, this is the next one, the Endangered Species Preservation Act, on October 15, 1966. The act initiated a program to conserve, protect, and restore select species of native fish and wildlife. As a part of this program, Congress authorized the Secretary of the Interior to acquire land or interests in the land that would further the conservation of these species. Now, I point to here, select species of native fish and wildlife. What's missing there? Plants. And plants aren't going to happen until 1973 Act. Okay, continuing. The Department of Interior issued the first list of endangered species in March 1967. It included 14 mammals, 36 birds, 6 reptiles, 6 amphibians, and 22 fish. Again, no plants. And I'll just mention there, my recall back at the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act, it was somewhere over 1,400 species or 1,600 species, something like that. So It's, you know, a few staff could handle that, but you need big staff if you're going to have that many listed species that you then have to try to recover. A few notable species listed in 1967 were the grizzly bear, American alligator, Florida manatee, and the bald eagle. And wow, I have to just mention for that, here I am in downtown Ypsilanti, Michigan. This is where the bomber girls worked, building the planes, taking over all the car factories that were here for World War II, building the planes. And our rivers got so polluted. Oh, it was just horrible. But right here, when I just walk out of my house and go to where I can see the sky, I'll often see bald eagles. And I know they're bald eagles when they're low enough and they've got the white head and the white tail. Right here, downtown Ypsilanti. The list included only vertebrates at the time because of the Department of Interior's limited definition of fish and wildlife. Okay, so all of mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish are vertebrates. The Endangered Species Preservation Act was repealed by the Endangered Species Act of 1973. Okay, but first we've got to get to the Endangered Species Conservation Act of 1969. And this amended the Endangered Species Preservation Act of 1966. It established a list of species in danger of worldwide extinction. While the 1966 Act only applied to game and wild birds, the 1969 Act also protected mollusks and crustaceans. And there I might point out to you here, here's an example of a crustacean. So again, most of the images I input, and also to make this a lot easier for people to want to read. And so here you could click on this and this would take you over to the Wikipedia page on that species. And from there you could get to more information on how it's been protected. Notably, the Act called for an international convention or treaty to conserve endangered species. A 1963 IUCN resolution called for a similar international convention. In February 1973, a meeting in Washington, D.C. was convened. This meeting produced the comprehensive multilateral treaty known as CITES, or the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. The Endangered Species Conservation Act of 1969 provided a template for the Endangered Species Act of 1973 by using the term, quote, based on the best scientific and commercial data. Okay, that's for listing species, based on the best scientific and commercial data. We're going to talk about that in the controversies and challenges section for sure. This standard is used as a guideline to determine if a species is in danger of extinction. Okay, passage of the 1973 Act. In 1972, President Nixon declared current species conservation efforts to be inadequate. Now, get that. President Nixon, he was Republican, and back in those days, just think about it, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act was part of this, Wilderness Act earlier. I grew up in Detroit, and there was just no way I could ever see the stars. The air pollution was so bad. I wasn't allowed to touch some of the creeks because they were so acidic when my mom was guarding us kids. Okay, President Nixon, we were across the aisle here, declared current species conservation efforts to be inadequate. He called on the 93rd United States Congress to pass comprehensive endangered species legislation. Congress responded with a completely rewritten law, the Endangered Species Act of 1973, which was signed by Nixon on December 28, 1973. So it became law then. It was written by a team of lawyers and scientists, including Russell E. Train. I actually met his son when I was working up in Mount McKinley National Park in Alaska, 1972 through 74. Russell Train was the first appointed head of the Council on Environmental Quality, the CEQ, an outgrowth of, the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, of 1969. Yeah, that was major. Train was assisted by a corps of staffers, including Earl Basinger at EPA, Dick Gutting, Jerry Bertrand, a marine biologist. This was information previously there, and it doesn't take up a lot of room. It's more detailed than I would have done, but you try not to delete things that other people have added to Wikipedia. The staff, under Train's leadership, incorporated dozens of new principles and ideas into the landmark legislation, but also incorporated previous laws, as was desired by Congressman John Dingell, Democrat of Michigan, when he first proposed the idea of an Endangered Species Act. Now, I'm going to move to where I've already put in the Wikipedia John Dingell page here. John Dingell, Representative John Dingell, the late Representative John Dingell. And when we move down to where it shows him as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Michigan, he was in office from 1955 through 2015. Now, I just looked at this yesterday, and it also says he was the longest serving member. That is 60 years. Gee, preceded by John Dingell. I was unaware of that. Okay, but the reason I wanted to come here is Debbie Dingell, that she took over when he retired. And so she got started. Let's take a look at her on Wikipedia. Debbie Dingell. She was the second wife of John Dingell. Okay, she's more my age. Let's see. Okay, she was, U.S. House of Representatives. She was preceded by her husband, John Dingell, and she's 2015, and she's here in the present. The reason it's called district, they redistricting. Everybody redistricts everywhere, and that's so controversial. But I'm still in her district. I'm here in Ypsilanti, and she redistricted to Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County. All right, let's go back to where we were here. So, we just finished with that. Now, this is really interesting here. I'm going to put in a better picture of this for you to look at. This is a listed species summary box score, and you can see the animal totals, the plant totals, and the grand totals for endangered, threatened, and total listings. This is so important, and fortunately, this is a place where the government does really well. It takes us to the ECOS, Environmental Conservation Online System of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service administers all the plants and all the animals that are not marine creatures. So here you can see the listed species summary box score. And look at how they group things here. These would be the spiders, crustaceans, insects, hydroids, flatworms, and roundworms. What's interesting here, they have a category for it, but nobody's in there. Sponges, nobody's in there either. Let's see if somebody's in corals. Oh yeah, look at, oh gosh, a lot of corals. Okay, but the main reason I wanted to go here was that I wanted to click on this, species reports. Again, the government, I don't know when this came about, but it was certainly by 2023 when I started editing Wikipedia. But everything that's in blue you can click on, and you're going to see aspects of this going along. And anything you see in purple means that my computer remembers that I've clicked on these things before. Listed species report. I mean, species with critical habitats, species with recovery plans, reclassified, species with 5-year review. Oh gosh, biological opinions. Later on, you'll see me click on that. Species status assessments. Oh gosh, this is a real improvement that happened around 2016, 2018, something like that. I'll talk about that in the controversies and challenges section. More in here, species proposed for status change or delisting, and miscellaneous. Looks like I've never used that. Okay, so again, actually I'm just gonna click on what would be good. Species with recovery plans. I'll click on that. Look at that. Now it goes wider here, wider than what I can show here. But here you can search by group, or you can search by, put in the species name. It's terrific. So we'll go back to here. All right, a law review article published in 2010 reflected on how this now controversial statute had moved through congressional passage with so little conflict and need for bargaining. Get ready for this. Essentially, no skepticism was expressed about either the law's conservation goals or its regulatory strategies. There was no organized interest group opposition. There was no organized interest group opposition. And probably nobody was donating to campaign funds either. No one voted against the Senate bill. 12 members of the House of Representatives initially voted no, but none of them spoke against the bill, and only 4 persisted in their opposition after the bill came back from the conference committee. Oh, for the days, huh? Amendments to the Act. Significant amendments to the Act happened only 4 times during the half-century of the Act's implementation. 1978, again, this was 1973 Act, so the first time was in 1978, 1982, 1988, and 2004. These are listed and summarized on a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service webpage titled History of the Endangered Species Act. Principal amendments. Let's click on that. Okay, so here you can see it's just short, but it's an easy place to see. On the ones that I consider important, I'll be excerpting here as I read. So let's go back to where we were. Okay, the 1978 amendments. Here they are. Creation of the Endangered Species Committee, later dubbed the God Squad. Oh boy, yeah, that's in the news now. If you professionally need to deal with the Endangered Species Act these days, you know what the God Squad is, even though it was rarely used prior to this administration. Later dubbed the God Squad, that authorized actions that could jeopardize listed species if the action is exempted by a cabinet-level committee convened for this purpose. So these days, that would be Secretary Burgum of the Department of Interior would convene this. Critical habitat was required to be designated concurrently with listing a species when prudent and economic and other impacts of designation were required to be considered in deciding on boundaries. So fortunately, the word critical habitat did appear in the 1973 Act. So now they just amended it to show a little bit more about how it would be used, actually to try to get it to be used. So it was required to be designated concurrently with listing a species. Well, that doesn't happen. There's just, staff is overwhelmed, and nobody really goes to court over that one. You just sort of wait for there to be a critical habitat listing. Third point, the U.S. Forest Service is to be directly involved in conserving listed species, and more direction was given for land acquisition. Okay, so that's an additional amount of money that can be spent beyond what you need for staff and beyond what you might share with the states, but actually for acquiring land for, say, wildlife refuges or to help states for their own state refuges. All right, fourth point. While species and subspecies can be petitioned for listing, only vertebrate animals can have one or more populations listed on their own. when the species as a whole does not qualify for listing. And in the controversy section, you'll see where that really comes up, only vertebrate animals. It comes up big time for salmon, the distinct river systems that they occupy that are just not connected in any way. Okay, the 1980, again, those were the 1978 amendments. The 1982 amendments of the 1973 Act are, first of all, listing decisions must be made solely on the basis of biological and trade information, without consideration of possible economic or other effects. So trade information was really important in the early days when people were selling the feathers of migratory birds and so forth. So it's different from economic interest. It's like, where's the data? Where do you get the data? How many deaths there have been? Second, listing decisions could be extended beyond the 2-year deadline, thus enabling the agency to engage in negotiations with parties that might otherwise sue in court for failure to meet the deadline. Okay, yeah. Third, establishment of experimental populations as a recovery action may entail fewer restrictions than those that apply to where the listed species naturally occurs. Now that one makes automatic sense there if you're going outside of what's called the historical range. But where it's become extremely important for the Florida Torreya taxifolia tree that I work with, have been working with on assisted migration northward in a time of rapid climate change, is that you can't, without this provision, you're not allowed to be counted as a species in recovery if you're planted outside of the historical range. And in the case of Torreya taxifolia, that was tiny. It was tinier than the county I live in here in Michigan. Okay, whereas listed animals always have takings restrictions wherever they are found, plants are now also protected from harm or collection, but only on federal lands. You'll hear a lot more about that later. Habitat conservation plans. Now that's an actual title of a tool that's being added here. Habitat conservation plans may be offered and approved for projects whereby incidental take may legally occur. In practice, such plans are approved because the developer commits to engage in some level of conservation action expected to minimize harm to listed species. So it's a really important piece in there to help get other people to pay for it, not taxpayers. All right, the 1988 amendments to the 1973 Act. 4 things here. So first of all, monitoring of candidate and recovered species is required. An emergency listing can be made if there is evidence of significant risk. Okay, that's common sense understanding there. You can do it before you've got all your scientific evidence put together. You just quickly make that pronouncement, and so that stops harvesting and anything else going on. In addition to listing decisions being offered in draft form in the Federal Register for the public comment before publication and final, now recovery plans also have to be published in a 2-step process. So listing decisions always had a public comment phase, but the recovery plans didn't until the 1988 amendments. And I've actually used that for commenting on the plant I work with. 3 elements must be included in a recovery plan. 1, the management actions. 2, objective measurable criteria for downlisting and delisting. And 3, estimated time and cost for achieving recovery. All right, the species I work with, the plant, Florida Torreya, Torreya taxifolia, listed in 84, recovery plan in 1986, and it's still endangered, hasn't been downlisted at all. So how was any staff person going to estimate the time and cost for achieving recovery for something that's already taken 40 years? No, I would not want to be that staff member, but I understand why it's in there. I understand. Congress must be given annual financial reports that list on a species-by-species basis all reasonably identifiable expenditures by the federal government and states that received Section 6 funds. The Cooperative Endangered Species Fund is established to provide funding for state grants, including land acquisition and planning assistance. Okay, I'm going to pause for that one. Take a look, annual financial reports. This is really important. And I'm going to overlay the video I made back in a year and 4 months ago, just a couple weeks after the presidential election. I put in a title, Doge for Endangered Plants. And you'll hear later on why I'm so grateful there are loopholes for plants that animals don't have. And it's common sense why you would have that. I'll talk about that later. But what you see here is, this is the title slide of that video. And if you go to the time code that I show listed here, if you go to that time code, you'll be able to see where I go through the annual financial reports just for where it lists Torreya taxifolia and that it's cost more than $1 million over that time period. Okay, down to the fourth one of the 1988 amendments. Protection for endangered plants is extended to include a prohibition on malicious destruction on federal land and other takes that violate state law. And you're going to hear a lot more about that in the controversies and challenges section, where the very first element there is how the federal law interacts with state endangered species laws. And finally, the last significant amendment was 2004, and just imagine how, polarized Congress had been getting. So it was just this one big important thing everybody could agree on. The Department of Defense is exempted from critical habitat designations so long as an integrated natural resources management plan has been prepared. And I think both sides of the aisle, when they really look at things, see how well the Department of Defense has done in terms of all these large amounts of lands they have for training and training pilots and how to drop bombs and all that, and messing up huge pieces of land. But they really have done a great job. Probably better than if, it was just Bureau of Land Management lands where four-wheelers could go through. So that was possible back in 2004. Major bills currently in Congress, I haven't updated this since 2025, since after the election. All right, going down to the features of the 1973 Act as amended. Here, I'm going to end part one of this multi-part series on the Endangered Species Act, ESA. Given how immensely long the Wikipedia page is, and given my tendency to offer extemporaneously thoughts and examples that come to mind, I'm betting that this will be at least a 6-part series. Be sure to visit the full caption here on YouTube to access part 2, and the time-coded table of topics covered here in part 1.